And now we pass, I ask please to Giorgio Berlingieri, and I ask Tom Birch Richardson to come on the stage, because we will remember a great man of maritime law, Professor Francesco Berlingieri, who has been with us in the first 3 editions of Shipping and the Law.
Ragazzi, giallo e blu, giallo e blu.
This is the slides. Press you when we will be ready. You can do this, but not yet. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Francesco Berlingieri has left us at the beginning of this year, and I had this idea to call Giorgio Berlingieri, his son, my colleague, maritime lawyer, I think at the 5th generation? Fourth. Andrea is the 5th, is also here. And I feel very indebted to Professor Berlingieri. I think as all my colleague and the shipping community feels and should feel. I think this was a very special man, probably one of the very few maritime jurist that was respected worldwide, was highly respected as a lawyer, as a professor, as an arbitrator, as a legislative negotiator of conventions. This is a very informal and also a bit emotional memory, because there is Giorgio, his son, and there is Tom, who is the son of Bill Birch Richardson, Reynardson, who is, was one of the closest friend and colleague of Professor Berlingieri. We thought that perhaps in the 10th edition we could organize a section with some scientific depth and contributions that could remember Professor Berlingieri. But I wanted to bring you this more personal and individual witnessing of how we miss him. I don't think that the conference would have had any future without his enthusiastic attendance. He was generally doing the opening speech or keynote speech, but he attended from the beginning to the end. And Giorgio came here, and sometimes just to accompany him. Then when, for health reason of Giorgio's mother first, because the professor was quite fit in his long life, through all his long life, the professor did not come. We had a conversation. Every year I sent him the little present, the tie that I sent to the speakers, and he called me to thank me. And this conversation, I think, took place also 10 days or a week before he left us. And in that occasion, I had the privilege to tell him not only how shipping and the law and myself, but how everybody of us felt indebted for what he did. I was I think 8 years ago, there were some studies in his honor in Genoa organized. And I remember that the intervention of Giorgio was about his military service as a Navy officer, a very brave Navy officer, because he, perhaps Giorgio will tell us. And I said, Professor, you are a person that I think there were more people like you, our country and probably the world would be much better. And he said, no, we can talk about this if you come to Genoa, because I think he wanted to have a chat with me. But he said, you know, in my life, the only thing I have always done the best to do is my duty, is to serve. And so I think this is the memory I've got of the man, such a great contribution. But he did it always with an understatement, always with a great sense of duty. Even if he was the keynote speaker, he tried to stay from the very beginning to the end of the conference. His diritto marittimo, I think, was his last duty that he tried to carry out. And I'm adding some picture of his participation to shipping and the law to the series also of pictures that I think Giorgio and Tom Birch, Reynardson would like to show you. So I don't add anything else. I think there is a last picture, we have seen it already. Yes, he's clapping his hand. I was clapping his hand at the end of his keynote speech, and he looked as a little bit surprised. This is an image of the man. So I thank in particular Giorgio, who asked also Tom to be here. And this is again a great honor for us and for shipping the law from Professor Francesco Berlingieri. So thanks for bringing again Professor with us once more. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Francesco. The two of you were very, very close each other, and you were a very great friend to my father. He was a great friend to you. As all I would say, lawyers and in Naples, and actually the maritime circle in Naples was very close and a friend to him. And no wonder why, whenever there was an arbitration with a party from Genoa, and a party from Naples with an arbitrator appointed from a party in Genoa, a Genoese, an arbitrator appointed from a party in Naples, a Neapolitan arbitrator. There was no question about appointing my father as third arbitrator, because he was so trusted by everybody that there was really no issue, no question. I mean, the title of this session, it is exactly correct, because my father, and of course, as you may appreciate, it's not easy to talk about a father, and particularly to talk about a father as my father. He in Trade Winds and in Lloyd's List, he was named a living legend of shipping. So he was he. And the title of this session is absolutely correct, because he was not only the promoter of unification of maritime law, of course, but as we may see later in one of the slides, when we organized the presentation of the essays in his honor in 2010, we had quite a number of speakers talking about him as a maritime lawyer, as an international lawyer, as the director of the journal The Diritto Marittimo, as the president, of course, of the CMI. He has been president for some 15 years. And so quite a variety of important passages of his life devoted to shipping. And of course, I have been so fortunate to be one of his sons, of course, and well, of course, either at home or at the office, he tried to teach me education at home and how to behave, and of course in the office he tried to teach me how to become a shipping lawyer, and I don't know whether he succeeded, but well, one of the things he was telling me is, Giorgio, be careful about facts, because you may win or lose a case on facts, no matter what is the issue at law, but look at your exhibits very carefully, every comma of your exhibits, and look at the exhibits of the other party, because I mean, you may lose if there is a minor error in your exhibit, and you can win if you find something wrong in the exhibits of the other party. And so I mentioned the event of 2010 for the presentation of the essays on his honor, and of course we were so fortunate to organize last year in September 2017 in Genoa the assembly of the CMI, and the shipping community of the entire world was in Genoa. Mans Jakobson was there, Fred Kenny was there, and many of you were there to pay homage to him. There were some, I think, 33 or 34 maritime law associations for all over the world, and this, I think I was so pleased that this was a good opportunity for everybody to pay homage to him, because he was not traveling too much anymore. He was 96, but he was very good, very healthy. Well, so it's very unfortunate accident, but he could have gone. And he was in the office and attending to the journal every day. So it was very nice. And why Tom here today? Because Tom, first of all, is a friend of mine, like Francesco, like all the Neapolitan and other friends here, Vittorio Porzo and all the lawyers from Naples and from Genoa, of course, and Tom is a friend of mine. Tom is a son of the best friend to my father, Bill Reynardson. He was the senior partner of the UK, Thomas R. Miller and Son. He was the vice president of the CMI, and so they spent their life together in the CMI, of course, and also joining holidays and vacations together with Tom's mother, Nick, and my mother, Anna. And so this is just a small picture about my father, of course, and Tom will say some words, of course. And we have a number of slides, just, which Tom and I will briefly describe, a variety of slides. And so, Tom.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Francesco, for asking me to come. This is quite a kind of personal slideshow, really, of almost photographs from the Berlingieri and the Reynardson family albums going back many years. I think my father first met Francesco at the Madrid conference in 1951, and they became great friends, and as Giorgio said, they went on holiday together and so on, and were always at the CMI together, supporting each other. I don't want to go on, but I do recall particularly something about Francesco, which was his great determination and the value he put to hard work and getting things absolutely right. And once at the Paris conference, I was assisting him when he started his great project on the carriage of goods by sea, which ultimately developed into the Rotterdam rules. And this man, I was a young man and he was much older than me. And my God, he worked us hard. We worked morning and night. And I remember particularly, there's always a day at the CMI, as many of you know, where we go off on an exciting trip, and it's all very informal, and everyone has a lot of fun. Well, I can tell you, working for Francesco, that meant getting into his room at about 7:30 in the morning and working till 12:30 that night. And so I completely missed out on the fantastic trip to Burgundy, which everyone had, and came back extremely jollily several hours later. But he was a most remarkable man, and I hope that this very personal slideshow will give you some kind of flavor as to the background, not necessarily on a legal front, as to the kind of man he was.
Yes, but he was also very sporty, and this is a picture when I think he was 16, 1938, at the Miramonti Hotel in Cortina. He was a boxer. I mean, he played rugby while rowing, swimming, and skiing. He taught me to ski and to swim, of course. And here he is in the summer family house in Spotorno near Genoa. I think he was 20 in the course of his military service at the Academy of Livorno, of course. And this after that, September 1943, he started as a navigation officer on a corvette, and then after the 8th of September 1943, he joined the British in the south in Taranto and became a torpedo man. You know, I mean, the assault units of, at the time, Italian Royal Navy were made of surface units and underwater units. And the underwater units were made of maiali or pigs because they were not very easy to drive. They had a crew of 2 and a length of some 5 meters with a warhead of some 1 meter, and they were approaching, entering in the enemy port, and then they were fixing the warhead under the bilge of the keel. And the other underwater unit was made of torpedo men, who were swimming close to their target and putting a limpet, an explosive magnetic mine, which they were wearing on their shoulders. And so this was made by my father in June 1944, when he put his mines on an Italian submarine, which was used by the Germans in order to try to use such German submarine against British ships. And this is one of I think it is the Bolzano.
Yeah.
The Bolzano, which was one of the targets of the British chariots in La Spezia at the time, yes.
And actually, Giorgio wrote a fantastically interesting article about this, his father's action in this operation, and I just read a little bit, an extract from it, which is actually Francesco's report, and I think it shows, you know, what a great attention to detail he had, even in relation to a naval operation, which obviously continued in his legal career. He says, 2 limpets were placed both on the starboard side, the first being below the forward end of the saddle tank at a depth of about 11 feet, and the second at the after end at about 5 feet. The reason for this difference in depth was that the respirator had been damaged earlier, which precluded a further lengthy dive as for the first limpet. The placing of the limpets was completed at 0240, the delay being adjusted to 5 hours. So you can see what a meticulous sense of detail that he had. I'd also like to read a short extract actually from the English commander who was also present during this operation, where he says, as far as the Gamma men are concerned, the Gamma men are the Italians, a separate report is being rendered. But I should like to state that they too showed great keenness and bravery in undertaking the mission, in view of the fact that, if caught, they knew they would almost certainly be shot. They are also deserving of great praise. So that is the British reaction to Francesco's bravery during this operation. Okay. It's also fairly remarkable, I think, that actually after the operation, Francesco spent 30 days on foot walking through occupied territory, and he eventually managed to get across the lines, where he bumped into some French troops who, needless to say, were in the process of cooking themselves a delicious meal, which he then was invited to share with them. So I think we've got just one or two more pictures of the maiale, and you can see. And then I thought I'd also just put up a picture of this officer, the Italian officer, Della Penne, who was obviously also an extremely brave officer in the Italian Navy. Indeed, he'd already, a few years previously, sunk or been in charge of an operation which was successful in sinking 4 British destroyers, which I think is a pretty remarkable feat. Even Winston Churchill said that this man was hugely brave. And when he was given the Gold Medal of Military Valor in 1945, the English admiral who was in charge of these ships insisted that he should present the gold medal himself to the Italian officer. So we'll now just also look at Francesco's award that he was given after the operation in Spezia. And as you say, it says, His Royal Highness, the General Lieutenant of the Kingdom, on proposition of the Ministry of the Navy, with his decree of 22nd March 1946, awarded the Civil Medal for Military Valor in Action to Midshipman Francesco Berlingieri. A volunteer in the assault units of the Royal Navy, selected to perform a daring action of forcing a domestic naval base occupied by the enemy, conscious of the impossibility of returning and of having to rely only on his own strength and bravery, carried out utmost scrupulous precision the task entrusted to him by attacking the planned target and penetrated unarmed into the occupied territory, avoiding the enemy's surveillance. After collecting with capability and intelligence important military information, was able to cross the battle line and to reach the liberated territory. Example of decision, bravery, and devotion beyond one's duty to his country, which continues the glorious traditions of the assault units of the Royal Navy.
Yes, here is just after the war, he was working with a salvage company in Fiumicino as a diver, yes. And then he joined the law firm of the family in 1945, 46, I think, yes. And then he married with Anna, my mother. This was the 9th of June, 1947. Yes. Yeah. Working in Genoa, I think, in the 50s. I think here in Spotorno, let's see, in the 50s or early 60s. Yes. This is the Andrea Doria, of course. I was in San Michele di Pagana with my grandparents, my grandfather Giorgio, when the telephone rang and my grandfather got the information that of the collision. This was the summer of 1956, and so my father was asked by Italia di Navigazione to rush to New York, of course, because he was appointed by Italia di Navigazione to act for the Italian interests. And Lord Burlingham was the law firm in New York, and Haight Gardner were the law firm instructed on behalf of the Stockholm. The Stockholm, which is still...
So the Stockholm, rather amazingly, is this ship, just photographed a couple of years ago. It's still sailing, and indeed you could go and buy a ticket on what is now called the Astoria to go to the Norwegian fjords, I think. So that even after looking somewhat crumpled, it seems to have survived and is still floating. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the Andrea Doria, which is at the bottom of the ocean.
here in the 60s in Portofino with my mother, yes, I think, and then my mother rowing, I think, somewhere. This is from Tom. And,
Yeah. Yes, so I thought this was a lovely picture of Anna, and I read something that Jose Luis Goni had written about, well, both Anna and Francesco. He said, many of us think that Francesco, our Francesco, couldn't exist without Anna, and this is quite common, as I suggest. In this case, it's exemplary. Anna's presence at the meetings, her tact and her charm, her familiarity with everyone around her husband, explains very graphically, to me at least, how Francesco manages to devote himself, body and soul, to the CMI, and at the same time live that family life in his Genoese headquarters. I also wanted to, this is a photograph of Madame Lila, who was the wife of Albert Lila, who was president of the CMI before Francesco. And in Genoa in 2017, Francesco made a charming speech to the CMI, where he said, I'd like to say how I became president of the CMI. There was a dinner reception in Brussels, and the president, Albert Lila, who had been the president for 30 years, and there was a moment when Albert Lila approached my wife. I did not realize why, and then she told me why. He approached her to ask her permission to nominate me as the new president of the CMI, and my wife was not so happy, but she said, how can I refuse to give you my permission? And when the permission was granted, Madame Lila approached me and told me that she would be delighted if I would replace her husband, who was rather tired after 30 years of presidency. So there's a picture of the great Albert Lila.
Somewhere in a cruise ship, I think my mother and my father, yes, in the 60s, I think, yes, or early 70s. Working on the beach somewhere in the Caribbean, I think, always working.
Yes, he didn't relax all that much. He always normally had some papers in his hands.
As grandparents, yes, with two of their 8 grandchildren, and here somewhere in Maine in the US with 2 other granddaughters. Here at my daughter Francesca, this was in, I don't know, some 10 years ago, yes. And this is the young CMI with Nick Healy on the left, Lord Devlin and my father at the CMI conference. Possibly this was in the 60s when Lord Devlin was chairing the working group after the Torrey Canyon, and so they were the promoters of the CLC convention and of course of the FAN convention. Yes, in Portofino, yes, a gardener, I think. Yes, this is.
This is a picture of my parents' garden, and I only photographed this just to show you that he not only was he a great sportsman, but he was also a great carpenter. This is the bridge that is called the Berlingieri Bridge in Oxfordshire in England. I thought we had to have this one up to show what a handsome young man Giorgio was all those years ago. But it's also of Anna and my mother.
Bill, yes, Tom's brother on the left, my mother, and Lord Devlin, I think, yes, in Portofino, yes. Mm-hmm. This is a picture when this was his first CMI conference in Rio de Janeiro in 1977, I think, yes. He was a smoker, and here with other friends of his, Nick Healy and Klaus Palme, at another CMI event. And this is...
this, in fact, is my wedding in
your wedding.
1983.
1983, with Klaus Palme and my mother and my father, yes.
So, Francesco, he was appointed actually by the English Commercial Court to be on the Commercial Court Committee for very good reasons. I mean, he was had been a significant user of the Commercial Court for many years, and of course he was a very suitable person to come on the committee, which he served for several years, and as a result he was appointed honorary Order of the British Empire in 1993, and the citation for that was, "You have achieved great distinction in the field of maritime law over many years. This has been widely recognized in the appointments which you have held in both national and international organizations connected with maritime law. Your association, for example, with Comité Maritime International dates back to the 1950s, and you served as president for 5 successive terms from 1976. Your contribution to maritime law has been recognized by other countries. In 1977, you were elected an honorary member of the United States Maritime Law Association. In 1981, you were elected an honorary member of the Canadian Bar Association, and in 1984, you were made an honorary proctor in Admiralty by the Maritime Law Association of the United States." In fact, it goes on to say, "Your association with this country is no less distinguished. You were elected a member of the Commercial Court Users Committee in 1977, and your service on that body has been greatly valued. It is in recognition of the valuable service rendered to the British maritime legal interests, Professor Francesco Berlingieri, that Her Majesty the Queen has appointed you to be an honorary officer of the most excellent order of the British Empire." So that was recognition from the Brits. But he was very widely recognized by all sorts of other people as well.
Yes, this is on his speech when he was appointed honorary professor of maritime law by IMLO, I think, yes. This is IMLO. And then, well, he was Doctor honoris causa by the University of Antwerp, Bologna, and I think and Athens as well, yes. This is from the appointment of Doctor honoris causa by the University of Athens, yes. This is with other 2 presidents of the CMI, Patrick Griggs on the left, and Alan Philip of Denmark to the right, yes. And here I think is at 1991 at the Restaurant Les Cygnes in Brussels. He was presented with a silver remembering after his 15 years as president of the CMI. And to the left there is Tom's father, Bill Reynardson, and to the right, Alan Philip, the president of the CMI, yes, at the time. And here is for the presentation of the essays in his honor, and this is a ship belonging to a great-grandfather of the Berlingieri family. Yes. And so there was, where I was mentioning before that he was a polyhedric activity. And then so we have an example here because there were speakers making presentation about my father as a president of the CMI, as a maritime lawyer, as the director of the journal, as a shipping lawyer, and then I made a presentation of my father as a torpedo man, of course. Yes. And that's it. And thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, to Francesco.
Thank you. And Tom.
Thank you.